One of history's most powerful ideas, a single metaphor written in candlelight, quietly becomes the foundation of modern economics. But what if the entire world misunderstood it? What if Adam Smith's invisible hand never meant what we think, and the real meaning changes everything you believe about markets, money, and human behaviour? Picture this. It's 1759 in Edinburgh, Scotland. A professor of moral philosophy sits in his study, candlelight flickering across pages of handwritten notes. He's wrestling with a question that has puzzled thinkers for centuries. How does a society of individuals pursuing their own needs and interests somehow create prosperity for all? Adam Smith picks up his quill and writes a phrase that will echo through history, shape global economies, and be misunderstood by millions. An invisible hand. Fast forward 2.5 centuries. That same phrase appears in economics textbooks from Harvard to Tokyo. Politicians invoke it to justify policies. Business leaders cite it to defend practices. And nearly everyone gets it completely wrong. This is empire economics, where history and money collide. And today, we're uncovering one of the most twisted tales in economic thought. The invisible hand has become the most famous metaphor in all of economics. It's treated as sacred doctrine, the foundation of free market thinking, proof that individual motives automatically translate into broader benefit. But here's what almost no one knows. Adam Smith used this phrase exactly twice in his entire body of work. Not as a grand theory, not as economic law, and certainly not as justification for unlimited capitalism. The man who wrote about the invisible hand would be stunned by what it's become. To understand how we got here, we need to travel back to that Edinburgh study and meet the real Adam Smith. Not the simplified version taught in economics classes, but the moral philosopher who believed human beings are fundamentally capable of empathy and ethical behaviour. Smith spent his life studying not just wealth but wisdom, not just markets but morality. His first major work wasn't about economics at all. It was about ethics, about how people develop conscience and compassion. The theory of moral sentiments, published in 1759, argued something revolutionary for its time. Human beings aren't naturally selfish creatures. We're capable of sympathy, of feeling others' pain and joy as our own. Smith believed this capacity for fellow feeling was what made civilization possible. Without it, he argued, society would crumble like a house built on sand. But Smith also noticed something curious about human behavior. Sometimes people acting in their own interest accidentally created benefits for others. A baker doesn't bake bread out of charity. He bakes it to feed his family and pay his rent. Yet his self-interested work feeds the neighborhood. A merchant doesn't trade goods to make the world better. He trades to generate income. Yet his commerce brings distant communities together through exchange. This observation led Smith to his first use of the invisible hand metaphor. In The Theory of Moral Sentiments, he described how wealthy landowners, pursuing their own comfort, end up employing countless servants, labourers, and craftsmen. They consume only a fraction of what they produce, Smith noted. The rest gets distributed to workers who might otherwise struggle. The wealthy are led by an invisible hand to share the bounty, even when sharing is not their intention. Notice what Smith wasn't saying. He wasn't claiming that self-interest always benefits society. He was describing a narrow case of unintended consequences. Sometimes self-interest benefits others, not always. 17 years later, Smith would use the phrase one more time in The Wealth of Nations. This context is crucial because it reveals how narrow his actual claim was. He was arguing against government policies that artificially promoted exports over domestic trade. A merchant naturally prefers investing close to home, Smith observed, because he knows local markets better than foreign ones. This preference for familiar territory isn't necessarily patriotic. It's practical. Lower risk, better information, easier oversight. But this practical self-interest, Smith argued, accidentally benefits the nation. Money invested domestically creates local jobs, builds industries, and strengthens the home economy. The merchant seeking security for his own capital is led by an invisible hand to promote domestic prosperity, though such promotion was no part of his original intention. Again, notice the careful limits of Smith's argument. He's discussing a specific scenario involving domestic versus foreign investment. He's not proclaiming a universal law about markets. He's not saying individual motives always align with collective good. He's making a targeted observation about how individual choices can sometimes support broader economic outcomes. Yet somehow, this modest insight about unintended consequences became transformed into something Smith never intended. The shift began in the 20th century, when economists building mathematical models needed simple, universal principles. Smith's metaphor was perfect for their purposes. It suggested that complex coordination could emerge automatically without central planning. But the economist who truly solidified this reinterpretation was Paul Samuelson, author of the most influential economics textbook of the modern era. In 1948, Samuelson published a description of Smith's invisible hand that would shape how millions of students learned economics. According to Samuelson, Smith had revealed a mystical principle in which individuals pursuing their own goals create the best outcome for all. Yet Samuelson's own technical work showed that markets only achieve ideal efficiency under conditions that never actually exist: perfect information, perfect competition, no external effects, no concentration of power. These assumptions are useful for theory, but do not reflect real-world conditions. The irony is striking. Samuelson attributed to Smith a theory of automatic market perfection, while also demonstrating that such perfection requires unrealistic assumptions. He created a simplified narrative that took on a life of its own. And because Samuelson's textbook reached millions of students who became CEOs, policymakers, and advisors, this simplified version of Smith's thought became dominant. The invisible hand became a shorthand argument that markets always work well, that regulation always limits progress, and that individual ambition automatically transforms into public benefit. But real markets reveal a far more complicated reality. Consider the 2008 financial crisis. Institutions believed that sophisticated financial instruments would distribute risk safely. Executives argued that market forces would naturally correct imbalances. But when the housing bubble burst, the cascading failures exposed how incentives had become misaligned. Mortgage brokers were rewarded for loan volume, not loan quality. Rating agencies were paid by the issuers they rated. Financial institutions took on risks structured in ways even insiders struggled to fully understand. Individuals were responding to incentives, but those incentives pointed toward short-term gains rather than long-term stability. The system didn't fail in spite of the invisible hand. It failed because the invisible hand was guiding participants toward outcomes that made sense individually but harmful collectively. This pattern appears in many industries. In ride-sharing markets, algorithmic pricing efficiently allocates rides based on demand. Yet surge pricing during emergencies may prioritize those who can pay more rather than those who urgently need transportation. Efficiency does not automatically equal fairness. Which brings us back to Adam Smith. The real lesson of the invisible hand isn't market worship. It's humility. Smith understood that individuals acting within systems produce outcomes shaped by institutions, incentives, and moral norms. Sometimes these systems create beneficial results. Sometimes they create harmful ones. Markets coordinate behavior, but they do not determine what is ethical, equitable, or sustainable. The invisible hand is not a law of nature. It's a metaphor for the unintended consequences of human choices. Smith, the moral philosopher, would remind us that markets are tools, powerful tools, but tools nonetheless. The real invisible hand is the collective impact of millions of choices made every day. Choices shaped by our values, our empathy, and the structures we build. Understanding the true meaning of the invisible hand doesn't weaken our appreciation of markets, it deepens it. It reminds us that human behavior is complex, that systems matter, and that wisdom lies in recognizing when individual incentives align with collective benefit, and when they don't. This content is for educational purposes only, and does not constitute financial, legal, or investment advice. If you enjoy learning how history and money intertwine, subscribe to Empire Economics for more untold stories.